When most people think of the D-Day landings, their minds instantly go to the iconic images of Allied soldiers storming the beaches of Normandy. For decades, films, books, and documentaries have told the story from the side of those who made the perilous journey across the English Channel. But far fewer have explored the other side, the story of the men waiting on the beaches, bunkers, and villages of France, the soldiers of the German army. And while it's understandable that history has emphasized the liberation of Europe and the incredible sacrifices made by the Allies, this has left a gap in our knowledge. Military historian Robert M. Citino once described this imbalance well. For the Allies, D-Day has become one of the great heroic sagas of the Second World War, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and ultimate triumph. But for the Germans, the sense of romance vanishes, leaving only the bleak reality of a once proud military machine struggling, failing, and finally collapsing under the overwhelming pressure of superior numbers and resources. Yet even here, within that collapse, there is a deeply human story. Before we continue, it's important to be clear. This documentary is not about sympathy for the Nazi regime, its ideology, or its crimes. Instead, our focus is on the individuals. The ordinary soldiers, many of them barely more than boys, many conscripts or foreign auxiliaries, who found themselves on the wrong side of history. By looking at D-Day through the German perspective, we seek only to understand the human experience in one of history's most decisive battles. To understand the German side of the Normandy landings, we first need to look at the tense months leading up to June 6, 1944. The confrontation on the Atlantic coast had been anticipated for a long time. As early as the autumn of 1943, Adolf Hitler summoned his senior military staff and told them that signs clearly pointed to an Allied offensive in the West, no later than the spring of 1944. And yet, spring came and went, and the invasion did not. For the German High Command, this delay created an almost unbearable tension. They knew the Allies were coming. The only question was when and where. On the Atlantic coast, two of Germany's most experienced field marshals, Gerd von Rundstedt and Erwin Rommel, were tasked with preparing the defenses. But the two men disagreed bitterly over how to do it. Von Rundstedt, the commander in the West, believed in holding German armored divisions back inland to be deployed only after the invasion began. Rommel, who had built his reputation as the Desert Fox in North Africa, thought this was madness. He had seen firsthand how tanks became vulnerable when Allied aircraft controlled the skies. With the Luftwaffe tied down on the Eastern Front, he knew that moving armored divisions across open countryside in daylight would be suicidal. To Rommel, the only solution was to station tanks as close to the beaches as possible, to drive the Allies back into the sea before they could gain a foothold. While their superiors debated, the soldiers on the coast did the only thing they could: wait. And waiting is one of the hardest duties a soldier can endure. To mask their unease, German troops made jokes. One popular quip was, "If you see a black plane, it's British. If you see a white plane, it's American. If you see nothing at all, it's the Luftwaffe." The joke carried a bitter truth. German air power in France was almost non-existent by mid-1944. Not all of the men along the coast were even German. Thousands of so-called Osttruppen, Poles, Georgians, Ukrainians, and former Soviet prisoners had been pressed into service by the Nazis. Many had little motivation to fight. Others were wounded veterans from earlier campaigns now reassigned to static coastal defenses. Supplies were short, morale was low, and food was often scarce. One young soldier, Paul Getz, just 17 years old at the time, remembered going 3 days without food or water before the invasion began. Desperate, he went into a nearby French village to beg for milk. The villagers, who knew him, turned him away with cold words. "Go away. The Allies have already landed with tanks." By then, their occupiers had lost all claim to sympathy. To make matters worse, even the commanders were unprepared. Convinced that bad weather would prevent a June landing, Rommel had left his post to visit his wife on her birthday and then meet with Hitler. Von Rundstedt, meanwhile, dismissed the airborne landings of June 5 as a diversion meant to cover the Allies' real objective, the port of Calais. When Rommel finally returned to Normandy on the evening of June 6, the damage was done. All 5 Allied beachheads were already secured. Operation Fortitude, the elaborate Allied deception campaign, had done its job well. Now, with the stage set, let us look at the landings themselves, not through the eyes of the attackers, but through those of the German defenders. For our focus today, we'll start at Utah Beach, the westernmost of the Allied landing sites. In the months leading up to June 6, German soldiers had worked tirelessly to fortify Utah Beach. They erected gun emplacements, dug trenches, strung barbed wire, and planted thousands of mines. Wooden stakes, steel tripods, and other obstacles were placed to trap or destroy landing craft. Streams were dammed, and floodgates were opened to swamp the land behind the beaches, turning fields into marshes. Many of these measures were the result of Rommel's insistence. He had studied the Allied landings at Salerno in Italy in 1943 and was determined not to repeat the same mistakes. Still, the men who carried out this exhausting work must have wondered every night, would it be enough? The answer came around midnight on June 5, when more than 2,000 Allied bombers roared over the coast, dropping thousands of tons of explosives. The bombing was ferocious, though its accuracy was questionable. Entire stretches of coastline were churned up, but many bunkers remained intact. Yet this time, unlike previous raids, the bombing was only the beginning. Soon after, paratroopers began to descend in the dark. Clashes between these airborne soldiers and German defenders continued until dawn. And as the sun rose, the defenders realized the truth. The paratroopers were not alone. Out on the horizon, the sea itself seemed to transform. Thousands of ships, from mighty battleships to small landing craft, stretched as far as the eye could see. Then the naval bombardment began. One young soldier, Paul Getz, later recalled walking over the dunes and seeing the armada. As soon as I saw thousands of ships and landing boats with barrage balloons above them, I knew the war was lost. For a 17-year-old, the sight was overwhelming. All around, buildings collapsed, animals ran wild, and the very earth shook under the bombardment. Yet despite their shock and despair, the defenders prepared to fight. Some may even have felt a grim sense of relief. After months of waiting, the moment had finally come. Joseph B., a German staff sergeant, described the feeling in his diary. Finally, the hour has come. Although it had to happen and was foreseeable, it impresses me a lot. Of course, it is no trifle. For sure, these hours are the greatest battle the world has ever seen. Hopefully, fortune is with us now. Scattered units tried to regroup and make their way to defensive positions. Those who did reached reinforced bunkers equipped with machine guns and anti-aircraft guns, but their fire was almost useless against the endless waves of Allied landing craft. And once American troops reached the bunkers, they brought with them devastating new weapons. Flamethrowers and white phosphorus grenades flushed defenders out of their positions in horrifying fashion. White phosphorus, in particular, was notorious for burning until it consumed itself, sometimes down to the bone. It was so effective that 5 medals of honor were awarded, in part, for its use on D-Day. By the end of the morning on June 6th, most of the strong points along Utah Beach had been destroyed or captured. Allied armored units rolled ashore to support the infantry. Much the same story unfolded across the other landing sites. At Sword Beach, German defenders faced paratroopers who had already seized vital bridges and crossroads. One German soldier, Helmut Romer, hid for 36 hours before finally surrendering to the British. At Gold Beach, aerial bombardment had shattered the defenders, and within an hour, British forces had broken through. At Juno Beach, Canadian troops not only secured their objectives, but advanced further inland than any other force on D-Day. At Omaha, German resistance was strongest, thanks to bunkers positioned close to the shoreline. For hours, the beach was a slaughterhouse. But even there, the sheer weight of Allied numbers eventually overwhelmed the defenders.